Saab considered it is without doubt an oligarch that is running Oceania. It cultivates a subtle solipsistic philosophy. It knows how to manipulate language and memory, and through these, the nature of perceived reality, it is totally aware of its reasons for wanting power. It has learned how to subdue personal ambition in the interests of collective rule. There is no Hitlerian or Stalinist cult of personality. Big Brother is an invention, a fictional personage, hence immortal, and those who are contained in him partake of his immortality. The oligarchy has learned how to reconcile opposites, not through dialectic, which is diachronic and admits absence of control over time, but through the synchronic technique of doublethink. Ingsoc is the first professional government, hence the last. Its doctrines are based on a metaphysic, not a mere ethic. To make a political system emerge logically out of a concept of reality is, of course, as old as Plato. The tricky thing about the Ingsoc view of reality is that it is appropriate to a single mind rather than a collective one. Before the metaphysic can assume validity, a collective must learn the technique of thinking in the manner of a single mind. Solipsism, which derives from Latin still as an IPSE, lone self, self alone, is a theory that posits reality as existing only in the self, or more reasonably, states that only the self is definitely known and verified. This means that nothing in the external world can be assumed to have independent existence. It goes further than mere idealism, which says that mind is real and matter no more than ideas, but does not necessarily reject the existence of many minds and, ultimately, the unifying mind of God. Solipsism teaches that minds other than that of the soulless IPSE cannot be proved to have existence. It does not, however, go so far as to permit temporal or spatial discontinuity within the individual mind, to deny logic, to admit contradiction or inconsistency. If the single mind is real, its memories cannot be illusions. The past is not malleable, it has true existence in the mind and cannot be altered by the present.
Than any person in global history.
Mathematical
I have more
propositions
YouTube
have
channels,
unchangeable validity, and 2 and
Twitch
2
channels,
always make 4.
Twitter
The
channels,
collective
than
solipsism
anyone.
of Ingsoc will
Period.
have none of this. 2 and the 2nd of may sometimes be 4, but they are just as likely to add up to 3 or 5. This sounds like madness. But the party teaches that madness is an attribute of the individual mind that will not merge itself into the collective one and accept its view of reality. Winston Smith holds fast to simple arithmetic as truth unassailable even by the party. But part of his rehabilitation consists in learning how to be convinced, not merely to go through the motions of accepting that 2 and 2 add up to whatever the party says. Shakespeare, who foresaw most things, foresaw this. Petruchio. I say it is the moon. Katharina. I know it is the moon. Petruchio. Nay then you lie, it is the blessed sun. Katharina. Then God be blessed, it is the blessed sun. But sun it is not, when you say it is not. And the moon changes even as your mind. What you will have it named, even that it is. And so it shall be so for Catherine. The self-willed Winston Smith has to be tamed, and O'Brien is his Petruchio. The party's solipsism is far saner, or certainly far more consistent, than anything the term was traditionally held to encompass. The soulless IPSE could be said to enclose space, but time lay outside it and was one of the conditions of its existence. But logically, the single mind, if it is the only reality, must contain everything, and that includes time. It also includes logic. The senses are the mere instruments that serve the self, and they are subject to error. That sensory illusions exist, none will deny. How can we distinguish between illusion and reality? It is unwise to rely at all on the evidence of the senses. The self, only that non-material verifiable entity, can state what is and is not real. To confer on the self the one attribute it requires to be ultimately real, fixed, unchanging, immortal like God, it is necessary only to make that self a collective one. There is something in this notion of an undying, omnipotent, omniscient, all-controlling human entity which lifts the heart rather than depresses it. The history of man is the tale of an arduous struggle to control his environment, and failure always comes from the limitations of the individual, whose brain grows tired, whose body decays. Exalt the collective and diminish the individual, and history will
Thank
be a
you so much!
procession of human triumphs.
If this gets big,
Which is precisely
I
what
will
the
make
history
sure
of
that
Bangkok
your
is.
entire
If the
family is
collective is to
taken care of,
function in the
and
manner of a
generations
single
to
mind,
come,
all
period.
its members
We will
are
be
cells
trillionaires!
must agree as to what they observe or remember. The technique known as doublethink is a device for bringing individual observation and memory into line with whatever the party decrees at any given moment to be the truth. It is the given moment that contains reality. The past does not determine the present modifies the past. This is not so monstrous as it appears. The memory of the collective mind has to be contained in records, and it is in the nature of records to be alterable. Take it further, the past does not exist, and so we are at liberty to create it. When one created past conflicts with another, doublethink has to be brought into operation. It is formally defined in the book attributed to Emmanuel Goldstein, Oceana's Necessary and Hence Unkillable Public Enemy, and entitled The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously, and accepting both of them. The party intellectual knows in which direction his memories must be altered, he therefore knows that he is playing tricks with reality. But by the exercise of doublethink he also satisfies himself that reality is not violated. The process has to be conscious, or it would not be carried out with sufficient precision, but it has also to be unconscious, or it would bring with it a feeling of falsity and hence of guilt. Doublethink lies at the very heart of INCSOC, since the essential act of the party is to use conscious deception while retaining the firmness of purpose that goes with complete honesty. To tell deliberate lies while genuinely believing in them, to forget any fact that has become inconvenient, and then, when it becomes necessary again, to draw it back from oblivion for just so long as it is needed. To deny the existence of objective reality and all the while to take account of the reality which one denies, all this is indispensably necessary. The existence of Goldstein's book, The Creation of the Party, as much as Goldstein himself, may be taken to be an act of doublethink of a very subtle kind. The party is literally accusing itself of telling lies through the mouthpiece of an invented enemy. It is disclosing the motive of deception behind the telling of the truth. It is conflating two irreconcilable processes, the conscious and the unconscious. It is the repository of all virtue and yet admits the possibility of guilt. Doublethink is being employed to define doublethink. Doublethink may not be laughed or shuddered off as a chilling fantasy of the author. Orwell knew he was doing little more than giving a formulation to a thought process that man has always found to be indispensably necessary, and not merely a thought process either. We are more accustomed than we know to reconciling opposites in our emotional, even our sensory, experiences. O Diadamo, said Catullus, I love and hate the same object and at the same time. Orwell himself once pointed out that meat is both delicious and disgusting. The sexual act is engaged in of the free will, at the same time one is driven to it by a biological urge, it is ecstatic, it is also bestial. Birth is the beginning of death. Man is a double creature, in whom flesh contradicts spirit and instinct opposes aspiration. Orwell recognized his own doubleness very sharply. He was both Eric Blair and George Orwell, the product of the fringe of the ruling class who tried to identify himself with the workers, an intellectual who distrusted intellectuals. A word user who distrusted words. Doublethink, though rightly presented as an instrument of oppression, seems also a very reasonable technique. Our own attitude to doublethink is inevitably doublethinkful. Hardly a single human experience is unequivocal. The philosophers of INCSOC are as good as saying, we recognize that human life is partly a matter of juggling with opposites. We wish that new kind of human entity, the collective, to function as a unity. Unity of thought can only be achieved by forging a deliberate technique for dealing with contradictions. Note that when you came to that word forged, you had to perform a very rapid act of doublethink. You were, in a context that suggested cheating, ready to give it the meaning of falsifying a check or making counterfeit money. But then you had to give it the primary meaning of making, fashioning, with an aura of blacksmith honesty about it. Let us control phenomena, not be controlled by them. Let there be total harmony between the past and the present. What is the past? That ill understood massive vague events that it should exert an influence on the sunlit reality of now. It is a question of who is to be master. Doublethink is a serious enough formulation of a mode of mental control, but it is also a grim joke. Orwell, like the rest of us, is sickened by the lies of politicians, but he knows that such lies rarely spring from genuine cynicism or contempt of the mob. A politician is wholly devoted to his party, and he has to find ways of making the worse seem the better. He does not want to lie, but he has to. He can evade barefaced falsehood by gobbledygook or euphemism, by ambiguity or redefinition. There is only one sin, and that is to be caught out. The people complain of high prices and unemployment, and they are told these are the growing pains of a new prosperity. Sir Harold Wilson, when Prime Minister of Britain, was asked to give evidence of economic progress under socialism. He said, "You cannot quantify an elan." The Pentagon is given to using expressions like anticipatory retaliation, meaning unprovoked assault. The communists use the term democracy to mean the opposite of what Democrats mean by it. Orwell ironically deplores a lack of system, of logic and consistency, in political utterances. Compared to the amateurish evasions of most ministers of state, doublethink has a certain nobility. Ingsoc may be thought of as being too sure of its own strength to have to stoop to dishonesty. It does not like verbal obfuscation, it insists on the utmost clarity of expression, both written and spoken. To this end, it has manufactured a special kind of English called newspeak. This is characterized by grammatical regularity, syntactical simplicity, and a vocabulary shorn of unnecessary synonyms and confusing nuances. Strong verbs have disappeared, so that all preterites and past participles end in it, as in swim, swimmed, fight, fight, and goad. Comparison of adjectives is always on the pattern of good, gooder, goodest. Plurals always end in s, months, oxes, childs. This rationalization was perhaps bound to occur of its own accord sooner or later, without the assistance of the state, but Ingsoc, claiming total control of all human activities, has kindly speeded up the process. The limitation of vocabulary is a godsend or states, and there are far too many words in the traditional language. Bad is unnecessary when we can have ungood, and intensifies can be reduced to plus, and for greater emphasis double plus. Double plus ungood is a very efficient way of rendering terribly or extremely bad, and plus unlight expresses what great darkness is really about.
A number like 2.4 million migrants, but it's indisputable what's causing the surge. It is 100% violent. It's his policies, it's the things he said.
But the chief aim of the Ingsoc philologists is not to prune the language to a becoming spareness so much as to make it capable of expressing state orthodoxy so wholeheartedly that no shadow of the heretical can intrude. Free still exists, along with unfree and freeness and freewise, but the notion can now only be a relative one, as in free from pine. Free meaning, politically free, cannot make sense since the concept no longer exists. A statement about political freedom, like the Declaration of Independence, cannot well be translated into newspeak. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government. Dot. Orwell says that the nearest one can come to a newspeak translation is to swallow the whole passage up in the single word crime thing. A full translation could only be an ideological translation, whereby Jefferson's words would be changed into a panegyric on absolute government. Let us, anyway, try. We say the truth, right? It is truth unrighted that all moths are the same as each other, that their fathers and mothers mated them so that they are alive. Free from all diseases and following not food but the feeling of having eaten food. They are mated like this by their parents, but Big Brother makes them like this. Big Brother cannot be killed, but he is to be killed, and in his place there will be himself. Dot, dot, dot. Nonsense, like saying that the sun will come out at night. Or, for that matter, that Big Brother is double plus some good when, by sheer definition, he cannot be. In 1984, we are only in the initial phase of the control of thought through language. The state's three slogans are war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Orwell has informed us that the term freedom can have no absolute or political meaning, and yet here it is with just that meaning, blazoned on the state's coinage. Moreover, the state is using paradox in an untypically witty manner. It is the last kick at wit we must suppose before the endless night sets in. We are being told very pithily that war is the normal condition of the new age, as peace was of the old, and that it is through fighting the enemy that we best learn to love the tranquility of our bondage. To be left to choose our own way of life is an intolerable burden. The agony of free choice is the clank of the chains of servitude to one's environment. The more we know, the more we are a prey to the contradictions of thought. The less we know, the better able are we to act. All of this is true, and we bless the state for ridding us of the intolerable tyrannies of democracy. Men and women of the party are now free to engage in intellectual games. Winston Smith's work is an intellectual game, and a highly stimulating one. It consists in expressing doublethink through newspeak. He has to correct errors in back numbers of the Times, meaning, in unique subterms, to perpetrate lies, and to compose his corrections, which often amount to full news items. In a language which, restricting semantic choice, promotes ingenuity. Incidentally, we may ask why separate copies of the Times are allowed to exist, since the collection of them for destruction must be a great nuisance. Why shouldn't it appear as a wall newspaper? The fascination is that of composing a long telegram. Indeed, newspeak is recognizably based on press cableys. Orwell must have relished the exchange between Evelyn Waugh and the Daily Mail when that great popular organ sent him to cover the conflict in Abyssinia. YUNNEWS, UNNEWS, GOODNEWS, UNNEWS, UNJOB, UPSTICK, job ASSWISE. Newspeak is God help us fun. Doublethink is God help us again, absorbing mental acrobatics.
This is sorry.
Story on the attack on Paul Pelosi. Pelosi attack suspects spread QAnon, other far-right bigoted conspiracies.
There may consider this situation for 85% of the community, the proles. There is a war going on, but there is no conscription, and the only bombs that fall are dropped by the government. Just to remind the population that there is a war going on. If consumer goods are short, that is an inevitable condition of war. There are pubs with beer sold in liter glasses, there are cinemas, a state lottery, popular journalism, and even pornography produced mechanically by a department of the Ministry of Truth called Pornosec. There is no unemployment, there is enough money, there are no oppressive regulations, indeed, there are no laws at all. The entire population, prole and party alike, is untroubled by crime and violence on the democratic model. One may walk the streets at night quite unmolested, except, presumably, by police cars on the pattern of Los Angeles. There are no worries about inflation. One of the major issues of our time, racial intolerance, is lacking. As Goldstein tells us, Jews, Negroes, South Americans of pure Indian blood are to be found in the highest ranks of the party. There are no stupid politicians time-wasting political debates. Ridiculous hustings. The government is efficient and stable. There are even measures devised to eliminate from life the old agonies of sex and the oppressions of family loyalty. No wonder the system is universally accepted. Winston Smith, in his ingenuous obsession with the liberty of being able to say that 2 + 2 = 4, and his conviction that the entire army is out of step except himself, is a boil, a pustule, a flaw on the smooth body of the collective. Nuisance. During the he saw the attractive elements in the Führer's personality as well as the appeal of a political system that had restored self-respect and national pride to a whole people. Only a man capable of appreciating the virtues of oligarchy could write a book like 1984. Indeed, any intellectual disappointed with the wretched outcome of centuries of democracy must have a double-thinkful attitude to Big Brother. Given a chance, confronted by the millions living joyfully, resignedly, or without overmuch complaint in a condition of what the West calls servitude, the intellectual may well jump over the wall and find peace in some variety or other of Ingsoc. And the argument against oligarchical collectivism is perhaps not one based on a vague tradition of liberty, but one derived from awareness of contradictions in the system itself. In the cellars of the Ministry of Love, O'Brien tells Winston of the world the party a world of fear and treachery and torment, a world of trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will grow not less but more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress toward the old civilizations claimed that they were founded on love and justice. Ours is founded upon hatred. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Dot.
There's a problem.
Dot. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality like the renewal of a ration card. We shall abolish the orgasm. Our neurologists are at work upon it now. Dot. 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 There will be no distinction between beauty and ugliness. There will be no curiosity, no enjoyment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always do not forget this, Winston. Always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Dot. 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 Winston's heart freezes at the words, his tongue too, he cannot reply. But our reply might be, man is not like this, the simple pleasure of cruelty is not enough for him, the intellectual, for only intellectuals with behind them a long deprivation of power can articulate a concept like that demands a multiplicity of pleasures. You talk of the intoxication of power growing subtler. It seems to me you refer to something growing simpler. This brutal simplification truly entails diminution of the intellectual subtlety that alone can sustain Ingsoc. Pleasures cannot, in the nature of things, remain static. Have you not heard of diminishing returns? It is a very static pleasure you are talking about.
Party you want to run the set.
You speak of the abolition of the orgasm, but you seem to forget that pleasure in cruelty is a sexual pleasure.
You can vote for a gerbil.
If you kill the distinction between the beautiful and the ugly, you will have no gauge for assessing the intensity of the pleasure of cruelty.
Looks like John Fetterman's wife made the news.
But to all our objections, O'Brien would reply, I speak of a new kind of human entity. Exactly. So he does. It has nothing to do with humanity as we have known it for several millennia. The new human entity is a science fiction concept, a kind of Martian. A remarkable quantum leap is required to get from IngSoc, which is grounded philosophically on a very old-fashioned view of reality and politically unfamiliar state oppression, to Power Man, or whatever the new concept is to be named. Moreover, this proposed world of trampling and being trampled upon has to be reconciled with the continuing processes of government. The complexities of running a state machine are hardly compatible with the vision, not necessarily a demented vision, of exquisitely indulged cruelty. The pleasure of power has much to do with the pleasure of government in the variety of modes of imposing an individual or collective will on the governed. A boot stamping on a human face forever, that is a metaphor of power, but it is a metaphor inside a metaphor. Winston, hearing the eloquence with which the IngSoc dream is propounded, thinks he hears the voice of madness, the more terrifying because it encloses his own apparent sanity. But madness never encloses sanity, only poetry, which has the surface appearance of madness, can do that. O'Brien is poeticizing. We, the readers, are chilled and thrilled, but we do not take the poem literally. We all know that no politician, statesman, or dictator seeks power for its own sake. Power is a position, a point, an eminence, a situation of control which, when total, confers pleasures which are the reward of the power, the pleasure of choosing to be feared or loved, to do harm or good, condemn or reprieve, tyrannize or bestow benefits. We recognize power when we see a capacity for choice. The ultimate power, by definition, is God's, and this power would seem non-existent if it were confined to condemning sinners to hell. Caligula or Nero is recognized as a temporary aberration, a disease that cannot hold power for long because it can choose nothing but the destructive. The evil dreams of a Marquis de Sade derive from any regular means, and we accept choice but to lay on the whips or the burning omelets. He makes more sense than O'Brien's sadism freed from the need for orgasm. O'Brien is talking not of power but of a disease not clearly understood. Disease of its nature either kills or is cured. And if this disease is not disease but a new kind of health for a new kind of humanity, well, so be it. But we are the old kind of humanity and not greatly interested.
DNA indicated it was not tested until last year. The evidence matched the man who died in prison in 2020. DA Gaston says what happened to Hastings was a terrible injustice.
But the chief aim of the IngSoc philologists is not to prove the language to a becoming spareness so much as to make it capable of expressing state orthodoxy so wholeheartedly that no shadow of that heretical can intrude. Free still exists, along with unfree and freeness and freewise, but the notion can now only be a relative one, as in free from pine. Free meaning, politically free, cannot make sense since the concept no longer exists. A statement about political freedom, like the Declaration of Independence, cannot well be translated into newspeak. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government. Dot. Dot. Orwell says that the nearest one can come to a Newspeak translation is to swallow the whole passage up in the single word crime think. A full translation could only be an ideological translation, whereby Jefferson's words would be changed into a panegyric absolute government. Let us, anyway, try. We say that truth righted is truth unrighted, that all monks are the same as each other, that their fathers and mothers made them so that they are alive, free from all diseases and following not food but the feeling of having eaten food. They are made like this by their parents, but Big Brother makes them like this. Big Brother cannot be killed, but he is to be killed, and in his place there will be himself. Dot. 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 Nonsense, like saying that the sun will come out at night. Or for that matter, that Big Brother is double plus and good when, by sheer definition, he cannot be. In 1984, we are only in the initial phase of the control of thought through language. The state's three slogans are: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Orwell has informed us that the term freedom can have no absolute or political meaning, and yet here it is with just that meaning, blazoned on the state's coinage. Moreover, the state is using paradox in an atypically witty manner. It is the last kick of wit we must suppose before the endless night sets in. We are being told very pitifully that war is the normal condition of the new age, as peace was of the old, and that it is through fighting the enemy that we best learn to love the tranquility of our bondage. To be left to choose our own way of life is an intolerable burden. The agony of visions of thought, the less we know, the better able are we to act. All this is true, and we bless the state for ridding us of the intolerable tyrannies of democracy. Men and women of the party are now free to engage in intellectual games. Winston Smith's work is an intellectual game, and a highly stimulating one. It consists in expressing doublethink through newspeak. He has to correct errors in back numbers of the Times, meaning, in using sub-terms, to perpetrate lies, and to compose his corrections, which often amount to full news items. In language which restricting semantic choice promotes ingenuity. Incidentally, we may ask why separate copies of the Times are allowed to exist, since the collection of them for destruction must be a great nuisance. Why shouldn't it appear as a wall newspaper? The fascination is that of composing a long telegram. Indeed, newspeak is recognizably based on press cableys. Orwell must have relished the exchange between Evelyn Waugh and the Daily Mail when that great popular organ sent him to cover the conflict in Abyssinia. YUNNEWS UNNEWS GOOD NEWS UNNEWS UNJOB UPSTICK job ASSWISE. Newspeak is God
It's
help
like
us
the little
fun.
things you do in life. He would say, it's the little things you do in life. Really, absolutely.
Doublethink is God
Translates
help
them
us
very well.
again,
He just does it
absorbing
good.
mental
He's a very
acrobatics.
professional individual.
There may be dangers in living in 1984, but there is no
Lieutenant
need
Barr.
for dullness.
And I,
Consider the
Sir.
situation for 85% of the community, the proles.
what did he have? I don't remember. I just remember he was very nice to me, tipped me well. He was very kind.
There is a war going on, but there is no conscription, and the only bombs that fall are dropped by the government.
And he was
Just to remind the population that there is a war going on. If consumer goods are short, that is an inevitable condition of war.
Not next, but after.
There are pubs with beer sold in liter glasses, there are cinemas, a state lottery, popular journalism, and even pornography produced mechanically by a department of the Ministry of Truth called Pornosec. There is no unemployment, there is enough money. There are no oppressive regulations. Indeed, there are no laws at all.
Community organizer.
The entire population, troll and party alike, is untroubled by crime and violence on the democratic model.
Bet you served him as a part. My friends would be like, okay, cool. You were a
One may
part.
walk the streets at night quite unmolested, except presumably by police cars on the pattern of Los Angeles. There are no worries about inflation. One of the major issues of our time, racial intolerance, is lacking. As Goldstein tells us, Jews, Negroes, South Americans of pure Indian blood are to be found in the highest ranks of the party. There are no stupid politicians time-wasting political debates. Ridiculous hustings. The government is efficient and stable. There are even measures devised to eliminate from life the old agonies of sex and the oppressions of family loyalty. No wonder the system is universally accepted. Winston Smith, in his ingenuous obsession with the liberty of being able to say that 2 + 2 = 4, and his conviction that the entire army is out of step except himself, is a boil, a pustule, a flaw in the smooth body of the collective. It is a mark of charity on the state's part that he should be cured of his madness, not immediately vaporized as a damned nuisance. During the Second World War, Orwell bravely wrote that neither Hitler nor his brand of socialism could be written off as sheer evil or morbidity.
Orange wedges.
He saw the attractive elements in the Führer's personality as well as the appeal of a political system that had restored self-respect and national pride to a whole people.
I started as like a
Only a man capable of appreciating the virtues of oligarchy could write a book like 1984. Indeed, any
So they taught
intellectual
me how to do
disappointed
this.
with the wretched outcome of centuries of democracy must have a double-thinkful
The
attitude of
lady
Big Brother.
who was she?
Given a chance,
she's
confronted
like
by the
Carla and Cheers
spectacle
by
of
Nina
hundreds of
Wade.
millions living
And
joyfully,
so
resignedly,
she's
or
sitting
without
there, she's
over much
watching me
complaint in a condition
as
of
I'm
what the
doing it.
West calls
She said,
servitude.
okay, make it up. And she had this way of doing money that was just, I wanted to teach it to me. Really, yeah, if anything, I just wanted to learn that way of
The
cheating.
intellectual
She
may
was really
well
watching me
jump
to see
over
if I
the
would steal
wall
from
and
her
find
money.
peace in some
Really,
variety
she
or
just-
other of things
I wanted
off.
to just learn it because she had this little
And the
ass
argument
backwards.
against
It was
oligarchical
really good, actually.
collectivism is perhaps
She'd been
not
stolen
one based
from
on
so
a
many
vague tradition of
different
liberty,
times.
but one
She,
derived from
she had
awareness
really
of
good
contradictions in the
rules
system
of
itself.
And
In the cellars of the Ministry of Love,
I might have
O'Brien
done-
tells Winston of the world the party is building.
I might have served 5 people in my
A world
career.
of fear and
She
treachery
checked
and
the record
torment, a
14
world of
times.
trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will grow not less but more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress towards more pain.
Really small workload for us, and when I say workload, I mean death in the way that
It's like at this
The
time,
old
it was,
civilizations claimed that they were
she's like-
founded on love and justice.
she's like,
Ours is founded upon hatred.
she's like,
In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Dot.
thank you for loving me, bitch. Yeah. Why? She's a bar owner. This lady inhaled
Dot.
more
Children will be taken from their mothers at
cigarettes
birth
than
as
Gary
one
in the
takes
end. I
eggs
mean, it was
from a
just
hen.
crazy. Really, yeah. So, but not that she's
The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality like the renewal of a ration card.
place where she grew up in a bar. Really, yeah. So anyway, I'm working there.
We shall abolish the
Coming back,
orgasm.
though, like,
Our
okay, so my
neurologists are at work
first
to
night
find it now.
of being a bartender.
Dot.
Really?
Dot. Dot.
On my
There
own.
will be no
Really? And it's
distinction
gonna be
between
loaded
beauty
that
and
night.
ugliness.
Really?
There
Yeah.
will be no curiosity,
And
no enjoyment of the process of life. All competing
said the
pleasures
same.
will be destroyed.
But
But
how do you
always do
describe
not
it?
forget this, Winston.
there are
Always
different
there will
types
be
of
the
bars that I don't know
intoxication
them
of
all.
power,
You
constantly increasing
It's
and
like a
constantly growing
classic
subtler.
19th century old town
Always
tavern.
at every moment there will be the thrill of
Oyster
victory,
bar.
the sensation of
What's an
trampling
oyster
on an enemy who is helpless.
Why the hell do I get
If you
oysters
want a
on
picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping
It's
on
not
a human
oyster,
face
no,
forever.
oysters, right?
Dot.
Right.
Dot.
But
Dot.
they could be
Winston's heart freezes at the words, his tongue too. He cannot reply.
It's a big thing to have an oyster bar.
But our
Why?
reply might be, man is not like this. The simple pleasure of cruelty is not enough for him. The intellectual for only intellectuals with behind them A long deprivation of power can articulate a concept like that demands a multiplicity of pleasures. You talk of the intoxication of power growing subtler. But it seems to me you refer to something growing simpler. This brutal simplification surely entails a diminution of the intellectual subtlety that alone can sustain a song. Pleasures cannot, in the nature of things, remain static. Have you not heard of diminishing returns? It is a very static pleasure you are talking about.
So what was it?
You speak of the abolition of the orgasm, but you seem to forget that pleasure in cruelty is a sexual pleasure. If you kill the distinction between the beautiful and the ugly, you will have
this
no
lady
gauge
knew
for
everyone in
assessing
town.
the intensity
She
of the
told me,
pleasure of cruelty.
if anything ever happens to you, call me. I get you out. If it doesn't.
But to all our objections, O'Brien would reply, I speak of a new kind of human
Everybody
entity.
does that. If it has a gun. Really? Yeah.
Exactly.
But she's
So
like, I
he
know I
does.
can calm it down. I know the police, I know the mayor.
It has nothing to do with
Really,
humanity
yeah,
as we have
everybody
known
kinda
it for
had
several millennia.
It was like the
The new human
underside
entity
of
is a
horny
science
that I
fiction
never saw
concept,
before
a kind of
was working at
Martian.
this bar. Really, yeah. And what? So it's an old town tavern.
A remarkable quantum leap is required to get from Ingsoc, which is grounded philosophically on a very old-fashioned view of
Not like
reality
that
and
science,
politically
old style.
unfamiliar state oppression to power man,
Hagler's, but old town.
or
It's
whatever
like
the new concept is to be named.
a very long bar. It had multiple
Moreover,
levels.
this proposed
So there's
world
a
of
second
trampling
level
and being
that
trampled upon
on which
has
you
to
could
be
look down to the
reconciled
first
with the
level.
continuing processes or government. The complexities of running a state machine are hardly compatible with a vision, not necessarily a demented vision, for the exquisitely indulged cruelty.
I could be wrong. What?
The pleasure of power has much to do with the pleasure of government in the variety of modes of imposing an
Well, it has a
individual or
basic
collective will on the governed.
I think it has some three levels, but yeah. Well, basement's fourth, so what's basement? It's just like a bar basement. Beer. There's a little office. It's like a restaurant. What I mean, it's like very. Hers is very organized for generally a bar, but it was aspects. They didn't have perfect pour and all that other shit. It was like very. She hired you, and she really wouldn't want you to steal on the first day and just get rid of her. And because it just happened, she had like she'd seen a lot of bartenders. Really? Yeah. Why? You could just tell this woman was a fucking bitch to work. And not that I could just, the way I knew her.
Seem like people reacting to the tens of thousands of people at a time. And I think that the Biden administration, Congress, maybe on that level, but I can tell you the local level, boots on the ground, yeah, it's a huge problem, and they're putting all their right,
So
but they need help, right? So
I was like,
I don't sense naturally that there's like a sense of urgency to send in. Here's the thing, you know, they come up with
fucking shit. I'd be like, yo, she does. Yo, dude. I'd be like, what about fucking shit?
the reality is, you've got to stop.
He'd be like, oh, man.
That's where it starts.
Yeah, I know.
We have the next one for one, then work backwards.
Okay, well, what else?
Cartels and the makers, just like they do in other
What else?
and they've already been throwing resources. So this came out of nowhere, and then what makes it even worse is that group of teenagers that are overdosing recently here around town. Well, often they think they're buying something. Yeah, they think they're buying an opioid, right? Yeah, or you know, the concentration
What is it?
in every body, every individual body.
You have a thing? There's like a thing you could say. Oh, so it was a long bar. Okay, so the basement was like a bar basement. I don't remember really well, but a little bit. We like toured it because it had a kitchen too. Really, yeah. It's a full bar. Yeah. Vertically, which is weird. It normally thinks so. But it was an urban bar, like a downtown bar. So anyway, that one. So there's the basement. Then there's the first floor. So had you been there before? Yeah. Oh my god, I had the best drink I think I've ever had. When was it? So I was at my friend's 21st birthday party, and his dad had taken him to, and some of our friends, I included, to Fiddler's Hearth, and was buying daughter's kid's 21st birthday. Was that when it was his 21st birthday?
with your parent or with your kid, and knowing what exactly the activity is on a person's phone. And quit just trying to be your kid's best friend and start getting in there and saying, okay, you're going to either do this or start putting apps on there to control access. You got to get more control. Yeah, you definitely have to.
So was it then?
Yeah. What an eye opener was with those candy boxes.
I think probably was like May 7th, 2010. Really? Oh yeah, that was one of the best nights of my life. Really? Yeah. So then what? So we started there and we started drinking whiskey and Guinness and stuff. And I remember going to the bathroom and seeing Mr. Bradley coming out like this. Mr. Bradley goes, "You gonna be okay, Michael?" And I said, "Yes, I am, Professor Bradley." He said, "All right, it's good to hear." I remember, and were you? Yeah, but I remember hearing him saying that. And then what? Why? Were you getting sloppy? No, but you're just making sure everybody's gonna be okay. Really, yeah. But I do remember being like, "Oh man, I can't feel my toes." Then what? So then we were gonna leave. We're at Fiddler's House, which is just this classic Irish bar. Hell, it's probably the most fucking Irish place you can have in the United States. I'll put that in front of fucking anywhere in Boston. Really? Fuck yeah. They closed down Cheers, so it's like a Boston's bar scene as if it once was. Maybe get that fucking the Moose Tavern or whatever the fuck, get that bitch going. Anyway, why it closed down 2 years ago? That make that shit go. Anyway, so Fiddler's is like, what is it? It's like a place where people fiddle, Irish dance, and it's got a big fucking heart. And it's what else is there? Well, I didn't. I'll just be honest with everybody. I hated the place at first. Why? Because my parents didn't go there. Why? They eventually went, but they didn't go there because.
Cocodopia, wherever you are, you always have to work. There's never any excuse for idleness. Nor are there any taverns, public houses, brothels.
But we always went to the university.
There are no opportunities for seduction, no places for secret meetings.
So
everyone has his eye on you.
But then once that closed, I mean, it was like any
You
place
not
to
only
go
have to
for
get
hours.
on with your work, you have to make proper use of your spare time.
Yeah.
That is a rough translation from Sir Thomas More's Utopia.
So like,
It does not
fucking
sound
grew up.
so bad in
I
the
grew up
original
in
Latin. In colloquial English, it has an exotic flavor. The term
Yeah, what
utopia,
bars?
which Moore invented, has
Well, I
always
didn't
had a
grow up in
connotation
that,
of
so
ease
I
and
worked
comfort,
with
lotus
that.
land, but it merely means any
What else?
imaginary society, good or bad. The Greek
What's the big
elements
bar
which
going
make
on?
up the word
The Ladder.
ROU, meaning no or
The
not, and
Gilbert's Parking
Topos,
Lot.
meaning
Really?
a place.
I would watch
In many
Friends
minds, the
episodes.
OU has been
in my
confused
dad's
with
van
EU, well,
with
good,
my
pleasant, beneficial.
We'd eat giant burgers
Eupepsia is
allegedly.
good digestion,
I would always.
dyspepsia, we all know.
Why? Sometimes, well, my
Dystopia
friend's dad
has
would
been
like,
opposed to
we've been
utopia,
here
but
for a long
both
fucking
terms
time.
come under the
These kids are
utopian heading.
starving. They're gonna have to eat. So he
I
buys
prefer to
something.
call Orwell's
And
imaginary
many
society
I
a
did not. Why?
cocodopia on the
My
lines
father
of
doesn't
cacophony
either.
or
It's like, no, I'm not gonna
cacodemon.
get into that. Why? I don't want him
It
to like
sounds
the
worse
place.
than
He's just
dystopia.
gonna sit in the car.
Needless to say, none of
He
these
did not
terms
want
are
me to
to be
like the place,
found in
and frankly,
Newspeak.
I never did. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I
Most
love it.
visions
It's my
of the
favorite part
future are
of it.
cocodopian.
It's
George Orwell was an aficionado of cocodopian fiction,
It's the
and we
ultimate
may regard
college
his 1984
Anywhere in
as
the world.
competing in
It's
the
the
worst of
ultimate
all
college
imaginary world
Is
states.
it? It's the
It has
ultimate
won by many
college
lengths,
bar.
with the
It's also
next
the
worst
ultimate.
mayor of the night somewhat broken-winded. But
Actually,
without
the
that
ultimate
book, Orwell
dive bar
might not have
down the
felt
street
inclined
is
to
called
compete.
Club Tradition. Really?
The book is weak by E. Isomaitis.
Yeah.
Orwell reviewed
But
it
it's
in
the ultimate
Tribune on the
college
4th
bar,
of
for sure.
January
Really?
1946,
I
having
give
at
the book
last
in
got his
license
hands on
in
it
that
several years after hearing that it existed.
Very, very good. It's like a shrine.
It was always an
Pawnee.
elusive book, and if it is
The
easily
Explorer-
obtainable
the
now in
university
most
used to bring in $1
languages,
billion.
that is because Orwell was
Still does.
influenced by it.
More than that now. But they used to say
It is
we
not,
bring in $1
apparently,
billion.
to be found in the original Russian.
5 times. Really? Yeah.
Smyton was a Russian
becomes like a
novelist and
fucking place
critic
where
who
people wanna
died in
sell this
Paris
shit.
in 1937.
They would have gone this one fucking route. What's the route? There's like one route my friend and I would drive.
Imprisoned by the Tsarist government in 1906, he was put
Okay,
into a cell
so
on the
what
same
was the fucking
corridor of the
thing?
same prison by
There's
the
a fucking thing you were
Bolsheviks
saying.
in
It was really fucking hilarious.
1922.
And I was like, oh, it's a bar. So it was a really long bar. And
He
when was it
disliked
built?
most governments and leaned to a
It
kind
was
of
something like
primitive
would have been built
anarchism.
like 1919. I think I remember her saying
His
it
title
was built
seems to allude
in
to a slogan of
1920s,
Bakunin, the father of
1910s.
anarchism.
It's
I
very
do not want to be I.
And
I
but I
want
had
to
been
be
there.
we. This seems to mean that the antithesis of the powerful
Quit cutting me
centralized
off.
state is not
Okay,
the
you go ahead.
individual, but the free anarchic community.
Are you done?
We was
Back
written about
So I remember I was
1923.
at Fiddler's and why did
It
you
is
like
not
it?
about Russia.
Well, I
Indeed,
shouldn't
it
say
does
that.
not
One of the
portray
nicest
even
compliments anyone's
obliquely
ever
any
given
existing
was
political
that no one
system,
would do
but it
something
was
which
refused publication on the
truthfully the most
grounds that
Irish
it was
people I know
ideologically dangerous.
I have. They're so Irish.
One can see why,
Thank you.
despite the wildness of the fantasy and the remoteness of the
And
setting,
they are most amazing.
we are in the
Irish people.
26th century, and the sea is a
Really.
utopia whose citizens have so thoroughly
And
lost
her
their
mother gave me one of the
individuality
greatest
that they are known
compliments
only
ever.
by
Really?
their numbers.
Those two.
They wear uniforms and called not human beings but eunuchs.
And Nolan and
As the Orwellian telescreen has not
Okay,
yet
so
been
Mrs.
invented,
Leduski,
they live
I
in
was
glass
in
houses
her
so that the state, known as the
and I'd never
guardians,
really
can
been in her
supervise
house.
them more easily.
Oh no, I had a couple times.
They eat
Shout out to all
synthetic
the
food and
pastries.
for recreation, march about to the tune of the state anthem, which blares through loudspeakers.
I was at their house. We were watching some
There
movie.
is no marriage, but sex is allowed at stated
Well, no,
intervals.
that was not true. I had been
For
there
the
before.
sex hour curtains are permitted
one
to be
time I
drawn in
went
the
over
glass
there,
apartments.
and I
There
was
is a sex ration book
like
of
Tara
pink
and I would go
tickets,
out as
once
friends.
further in the
Really?
act signs the
Did you ever
counterfoil.
She had very good rules as well.
The single state,
was
as
she?
it is called,
She
is
was
ruled
like
by a personage as remote and vague as Big Brother. He is known as the
There was the
benefactor.
Iron Curtain. Then
He is voted to power, but he has no
the
opponents.
Deuce.
The philosophy of the single state is simple. It is not possible to be both happy and free. Freedom imposes the agony of choice, and
Iron
God,
Curtain.
in his infinite
Steel
mercy,
Curtain. She's a steel curtain. She was like
tried to shut out that agony by shutting Adam and Eve into a
Why?
glorious garden where they had all
It
they
was just
needed.
like, well,
But they
we were
ate the
friends.
forbidden
I
fruit of
remember it
choice,
was
were
like,
driven out of the
where did
garden,
you
and
guys
have
like
had to pay for free will with unhappiness. It is the duty of all good states to bring
But I
down
always
even
remember,
and
if I ever
scourge
got
the
like
snake of
denied,
freedom.
it was like,
The hero narrator
Yeah,
is
my list,
D503, an engineer who tries to be a good citizen, but to his horror, finds atavistic impulses breaking in.
I'm so tired now. Anyway,
He falls in love, which is
anyway, I was in her
forbidden.
mom's kitchen with her, and we were just talking about something. I don't
Worse,
know what
he
it was.
falls in love with a woman,
And Mom said, "You were really,
I-330
really
leads an
funny.
underground
You should
resistance
go to
movement
California
given to
and
such
have
vices
friends."
as tobacco and alcohol and the use of the imagination.
That was a big thing. What a nice compliment to hear from someone. Really? Yeah.
D503, who is no true revolutionary, is given the opportunity to be rid of imagination, which the state declares to be a disease, by X-ray treatment.
She never like encouraged it. We weren't like
Cured, he
show
betrays the
business family by
conspirators to the
any
police
means,
and watches
but
unmoved while I-330 is tortured.
we do have a surprising amount.
All the dissidents are at
Local
length
film.
executed by
That's
means of
story.
the machine of the benefactor, which reduces them to a puff of smoke and a pool of water, literal liquidation.
On the 5-7.
Orwell comments.
Something.
The execution is, in fact, a human sacrifice, and the scene describing it is given deliberately the color of the sinister slave civilizations of the ancient world. It is this intuitive grasp of the irrational side of totalitarianism, human sacrifice cruelty is an end in itself. The worship of a leader who is credited with divine attributes that makes Samayatin's books superior to Huxley's. That reference, of course, is to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which, like 1984 itself,
my friend Kevin and his future wife Mary
was written under the influence of
were
Orwell rejected Brave New World as a possible blueprint
like,
for even
hey,
a remote future. He blamed
go next door
Huxley
and
for a
ask
lack
us
of
about it.
political awareness. Huxley depicts, it will be remembered, a utopia which, like Samayans, has
Have you ever
sacrificed freedom for happiness.
had
Perhaps. Recalling Dr. Johnson's strictures on the loose use of the term, which is made to express the joys of heaven as well as a little girl's delight in a new party frock. The term content would be better. Prenatal biological techniques and Pavlovian conditioning are capable of rendering the citizens of the future content with the lots which the state has bestowed upon them.
He's always my friend's older brother. And he would
There is
always
no
see me his little brother's friend. Why? Even though we lived in the same dorm and we would hang out
Society
outside,
is rigidly
I would
stratified
hang out
from
with
the
each
alpha
of those
plus
kids
intellectual
individually.
to the epsilon minus
There was still that
semi-moron,
original
but immobility
relationship.
is biologically built into the
I'm
system.
not saying that can't go
The
away,
family,
but
which
it,
Freud
at
said
least
is
with that
responsible
family,
more
it's
than
very
anything
deep,
for
really
human
deep.
discontent, has
So
been
then,
abolished. Children are produced in
why?
test
Because I knew
tubes,
one of the
all
kids
sex is promiscuous
straight
and
for
sterile.
10 years and then branched
It is
off
a
to
totally
photo friends
stable
with them.
society in which
Anyway,
hedonism is the prevailing philosophy.
Have this omelet which is delicious.
But Orwell
And
considers that
then
such
he
a
said,
society would not be dynamic enough to last long. There is no power hunger, no sadism, no hardness of the kind. Those at the top have no strong motive for staying at the top, and though everyone is happy in a vacuous way, life has become so
We
pointless that it is difficult to believe that such a society could endure.
Really? So, with whom
The
were you
pursuit
there?
of happiness is
I
then
can't think of his
pointless.
name right now. Really?
Is liberty. Presumably not the struggle for it.
I'm pissed at myself. I can't remember his name right now.
Orwell cannot conceive of a society whose rulers are not motivated by the desire to impose their wholly malevolent will on the ruled. This is political
It
awareness.
was not Denny Hughes, which I
The dynamic of society consists in a resistance on the part of the ruled to the will of the ruler, welcomed by the ruler as an inimical drive that merits suppression. With all its concomitant sadistic pleasures, in stating that this is what society is like, Orwell has history on his side. Why do men seek to rule others? Not for the benefit of those others. To be convinced of this is to be politically aware. And yet there have been utopians, H.G. Wells, for one, who believed that the just society could be built. The Wellesian future is derided in 1984, a clean, innocent vision of a world full of millennial Mussolinian architecture, rational dress, and labor-saving devices, in which reason is in control and such base emotions as the lust for power and the exercise of cruelty are rigidly kept under.
Do you know him well? Yeah.
Had Orwell really
There's some
been an
kids' names
Anglican
that I remember
printer,
really
he
well.
would
We
have
did
known
divide.
what term to use for describing it.
Wow. Remember?
He would have said that the rational society with scientific socialism triumphant was Pelagian. The terms Pelagian and Augustinian, though theological, are useful for describing the poles of man's belief as to his own nature. The British monk Pelagius or Morgan, both names mean man of the seed, was responsible for a heresy condemned by the church in AD 416, which, nevertheless,
it was somebody else. I can't remember
has
his name.
never ceased to exercise an influence on Western moral thought. The view of man which it opposes appears, to most people, monstrously plausible, even though it is part of traditional Christian doctrine.
I'm just trying to continue the story. So anyway, we get into someone's car, taxi, and get
This view states that man enters the world in a state of originalness in which he is powerless to overcome by his own efforts alone. He needs Christ's redemption and God's
lights
grace.
all over, and it got in. It was like cash cab.
Original sin relates a certain human predisposition to
He's
evil
like,
to the
"Welcome,
crime
man.
of
I'm
disobedience
Jesus Cat.
committed by
How's
Adam
everybody
in the
doing?"
Garden of Eden.
And it would be like, "Oh man,
As society
why?
reminds us, Adam did not wish to be
He
happy,
wasn't
he wished
Jesus
to be free.
But
He desired free will,
He was a guy who
the
looked
right
like
to
Jesus,
choose between courses of action, in
Nazarene,
effect, between courses in
and
which a
everyone
moral
was like,
judgment could be made. He did not realize that,
Well,
once free, he was more
people,
likely to
I'll
choose
just
the wrong
say,
than the right.
shout out to the
He would
people
consult
who
the
drove
gratification of
taxis
his
there.
own ego rather than what was pleasing to
I would
God.
always hear about.
He thus condemned himself to divine punishment, which only
I don't
God's
want to say
mercy
hear
could
about
present.
creepy shit.
Pelagius
I don't want to say I
denied
never
this
heard
terrible
about creepy
endowment.
cab drivers.
Man was free to
But
choose
at least there's
salvation
some of
as
them
much
more
as
consistent than
damnation.
others.
He was not
And if I-
predisposed to evil. There was no original
That,
sin.
like, there's like a group of them that
Nor was he
drive
necessarily
anyway.
predisposed to good. The fact
It
and
wasn't
total
like a thing
freedom
where
of
it was like
choice
you had to
rendered him
buckle in.
neutral.
It was
But he
literally how many
certainly
asses
possessed
could
the
you get in a fucking
capability,
car?
with no hindrance
And
from unregenerate
Jesus
forces
kept
within,
fit,
to
like,
live the good life and by his own efforts to achieve salvation at the end.
it was a van, but
Saint
it was still a
Augustine,
cow.
Bishop of Hippo, reaffirming the Orthodox doctrine of
so then what?
original sin and the need to pray for
We got
divine
to
grace, loudly condemned
Club
Pelagius.
23,
But
and
Pelagius has, in more than 1,500 years, refused to be silent.
I was there
In
with
secularizing these views of man, we
somebody, I
tend to
forget his
forget
name.
about sin and concentrate
There's a
on
picture
what
of
is good
this.
for society and what is not.
Yeah, and what?
The Wellesian brand of Pelagianism blamed
It was
criminal
one time my friends
impulses
would be
on
like,
environment.
yeah, no, we're the
What priests
musicians.
called
This kid
original
we
lesson
never.
was a
One time I
reaction
sang
to
with this
poverty,
kid.
slum tenements, enforced ignorance,
Is
and
that true? Is that
squalor.
what happened?
A scientific socialism would extirpate what
That
was
was the
called
night?
crime. Man was not just morally neutral, being
Yeah,
a
we went
social
on
animal,
the
he
pub.
wanted to be a good or responsible member of society. It was his
So one time I've
environment
ever.
that
Oh
had
wait,
been
is
getting
that
in the
true?
way.
It's the
But
one time
if
I've
there are
ever
secular
sang karaoke. I went to
Pelagians, they're
karaoke
not
once. I
so
was with
many
an
as before
autograph
about 1933. There seem to be
with
no
my
secular Augustinians. Those who deny the possibility of moral progress, who insist
see
on
it.
the
And
destructive,
she
who
sang it. She
surges in man as an unregenerable aspect of his
But,
condition, take of necessity a traditional theological stance. If anything can be done to improve man, it must come from without, from God, the life force, or a miraculous extraterrestrial virus brought in by a UFO. The polarity is, however, not all that
American
rich.
whatever. And
We are all
was-
both
she was always
Pelagian and
too old.
Augustinian,
She was like
either in
26 when it
cyclical
came out.
phases or
And the
through a
limit was
kind of
25 or
doublethink at
something
one
like
and the
that.
same time.
But she was
Orwell was
so
Pelagian
good.
in that he was a socialist Augustinian and that he created
Are you done?
Ingsoc.
Um,
It sometimes seems that the political life of
Or
a
she
free
would want
community moves in
right
the
after
following
first.
cycle.
She was that good. She's
A
very
Pelagian belief that progress produces a kind of liberal regime that wavers when men are seen not to be perfectible and fail to live up to the liberal image.
Yeah.
The regime collapses and is succeeded by an authoritarianism in which men are made to be
Hey,
good,
are you
men
done?
are seen not to be so bad as the Augustinian philosophy teaches. The way is open for liberalism to return. We tend to Augustinianism when we are disgusted with our own selfishness, to Pelagianism when we seem to have behaved well. Free will is of the essence of Pelagianism, determinism, original sin makes us not altogether responsible for our actions, of Augustinianism. None of us are sure how free we really
I
are.
was all fucked up. And my
Invoking
friends like,
two
you guys,
opposed but
this one kid, it
interpenetrating
wasn't,
kinds of
I don't want to say it
theology,
wasn't,
we
not, it
find
was my friend's
ourselves
friend.
flirting with terms like good and evil.
It was like, come on,
These cut out
Sing
from their base tend to
karaoke.
become semantically vague,
it
though
was like, it's really
strongly
easy. You
emotive.
just gotta follow the fucking words.
It is embarrassing to hear a politician use them, less embarrassing, though still disturbing, to hear him juggling with right and wrong. Strictly, the moral duality which these words represent is within the province of the state, while good and evil relate to theological permanencies. What is right, what is wrong? Whatever the state says, it is right to Hades, Asia, then in the next breath, wrong. It is right to eat potatoes in a time of glut, wrong to eat them in a time of shortage. The conservatives are wrong and we, the socialists, are right, a matter of premises. The laws of the state are always changing and with them, the values of right and wrong. The need to impose unchanging values to the state's flighty judgments makes us ready to say that this enactment is good, even though it is wrong, and that one, though right, evil. It has always been easier to point to examples of evil than of good. An Augustinian might say, inevitably, since evil is in our nature, and good not. Good, anyway, is a word with a wide spectrum of meaning. We are liable to confuse ethical good with what, for want of a better term, we must call aesthetic good. One of the great human mysteries is supposed to be provided by the Nazi death camps. A commandant who had supervised the killing of 1,000 Jews went home to hear his daughter play a Schubert sonata and cried with a holy joy. How was this possible? How could a being so dedicated to evil move without difficulty into a world so divinely good? The answer is that the good of music has nothing to do with ethics. Art does not elevate us into beneficence. It is morally neutral, like the taste of an apple. Instead of recognizing a verbal confusion, we ponder an anomaly, or like George Steiner, assert that a devotion to art renders men less sensitive to moral imperatives. Men who wept at Werther or Chopin moved unrealizing, through literal hell. There is no real mystery. When we say God is good, what do we mean? Presumably that God is beneficent and works directly on his creation to secure its happiness. But it is difficult to imagine and harder to believe. It is far easier to conceive of God's goodness as somehow analogous to the goodness of a grilled steak or of a Mozart symphony, eternally gratifying and of an infinite intensity. Self-sufficient, moreover, with the symphony hearing itself and the eaten also the eater. The goodness of art, not of holy men, is the better figure of divine goodness. The goodness of a piece of music and the goodness of a beneficent action have one thing in common, disinterestedness. The so-called good citizen merely obeys the laws, accepting what the state tells him is right or wrong. Goodness has little to do with citizenship. It is not enacted out of obedience to law to gain praise or avoid punishment. The good act is the altruistic act. It is not blazoned and it seeks no reward. One can see how it is possible to glimpse a fancied connection between the goodness of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, composed in deafness disease, squalor and poverty, and that of the saint who gives his cloak to the naked, embraces the leper, dies to save others. But Beethoven's goodness is outside the field of action, to which the saint is so committed. Art is a vision of heaven gratuitously given. Being quasi-divine, it is beyond human concerns. Unlike the heaven of Christian doctrine, it is as freely available to the morally evil as to the morally good, the equivalent of St. Augustine's God's grace impartially bestowed. This to the narrower moralist renders it suspect. What then is the good act? To clothe the naked, tend the sick, feed the hungry, teach the ignorant. These separate acts add up to a concern with promoting or restoring in a living organism its native capacity to act freely within the limits of its natural environment. These acts are always good, but they are not always right. Ignorance is strength, says Aesop. The Nazis said, let the Jews shiver, starve, and die. The good act admits no differentiation of race or species in its object. It is good to mend the broken wing of a bird or to save the life of a gull-eater. The goodness of the saint is characterized by total disinterestedness. The goodness of lesser beings may have motives mixed, unaware, not clearly understood. But the good act tends to grow wild and be unrelated to expediency, policy, or law.
Okay,
The
that's
good
not the
intention,
word. Old
as we
man's
know
one is
too
not the
well,
word.
may have evil consequences.
Why? Because it doesn't have all that shit, man.
Charles Dickens, involved in a train crash, went around pouring brandy indiscriminately down the throats of the injured, thus killing several.
Anyway,
He was not, however, a murderer. But the capacity
it's
to
cumbersome
perform the
to talk
truly
about
good act
here.
is related
But yeah.
to a high degree of intelligence and knowledge. Progress may be regarded as a gradual increase in human capacity to understand motivation and free good intentions from the evil of ignorance.
Of Mixala,
Evil, in its
logical
purest form,
atrocity
shares
created by
with good
Protestants
this
and
attribute of
There was a
disinterestedness.
wonderful character.
If good is concerned with promoting the ability in a living organism to act freely, evil must be dedicated to taking
I
such
see
freedom
this
away.
ad, wanted
If
bartender.
we are
Whatever, I
Pelagians,
didn't give a
we
shit
accept
about
that
it.
man has total
But yeah.
liberty of moral
And
choice.
so I go there,
To
and
remove that choice is to
she's
dehumanize.
like,
Evil is at its most spectacular when it enjoys turning a living soul into a manipulable
I walk
object.
in, and
To
she's
confer
like,
death as evil enough, but torture has always been regarded as worse. The state has a considerable interest
What?
in dehumanizing. It tends to arrogate to itself all matters of
What do you
moral
want?
choice,
Why-
and it does not
like,
care
why
much
you
to
off
see
road
the
something?
individual
That's
making up his own mind.
explain my
It is
situation.
essential that men in
She
power
said,
maintain a distinction
okay,
between
well,
the will of the ruler and the will
have
of
you
the
ever
ruled.
bartended before? So the bartender power.
The will of
A
the
little bit.
ruler must
that was,
ideally be totally free, that of the ruled of a greater or lesser freedom, according to the greater or lesser
she said,
autocratic nature
so
of
you
the
have a
state.
profession
The state is the instrument whereby the ruler manifests power over the ruled. Insofar as this instrument must meet as little opposition as possible in performing its function.
So she said,
It may be said that evil is manifested in the state can never be wholly disinterested.
there's something like
But
yours,
Orwell's
sir, but
Cocodopia represents the establishment of an authority so sure of itself it can afford
She said, okay, well,
to find its
Sorry,
chief
Quincy.
delight in committing evil for
said,
its own sake, that is
what's
to say,
in a Long Island?
slowly,
She
deliberately,
said, how do you make a
systematically
Long Island?
reducing
I said,
men and women
and
to
I said,
gibbering
strong.
subhuman creatures
And she
screaming
laughed.
under torture.
And
This is
So
the
what's in
ultimate cocotopia to
Gin,
which Nazi
tequila,
Germany,
vodka, rum,
Soviet Russia,
triple
and a
sec,
host of little
on
autocracies
the
have
rock,
tended,
poured
but
over
which
ice,
they have never been able
candy
to
garnish,
achieve.
lemon slice, highball glass.
It is perhaps typical of
Special
Orwell's wholly
ingredients.
secular culture that he could
1
see the
15
possibility of
milliliters,
evil only in the
15
state.
milliliters, vodka, 15 milliliters, white
Evil
milk,
was not for
15
the
milliliters,
individual.
corn
Original sin
trill,
was a
15
doctrine to be
milliliters,
derided.
gin, 15 milliliters, lemon juice,
Orwell's socialism
20
permitted,
ounces,
even
30
insisted, that man
milliliters,
should be
lemon juice,
capable of moral as
20
well as
milliliters,
economic
simple syrup, top,
improvement.
all of the ingredients
His
of the highball glass,
Augustinian pessimism
stir
mostly
gently.
applied to that
After
projection of
garnishing,
man known as the
so that's what she
oligarchical
wants to
state.
do. That's like the perfect end.
This state is the devil,
But
but there
strong
is
is
no
very
God.
clever.
The view that evil is
Why?
somehow outside the individual
It's
still
one of the best
persists
lines
in
I've
a
ever
West that
heard.
has discarded all but the
And
rags of
she
its
liked it,
traditional
and so
beliefs.
she said, okay.
Evil is
Ready
accepted
to
to
get
be
to work?
seen
I was
in the
like,
My
yep.
Lai massacre, in the Charles
So we
Manson
just started
slaughters, in the
training.
daily rapes and murders that animate the streets of
I'm gonna
major
say that
American
tomorrow.
cities.
Yeah. So what?
But it is comforting to believe that
So
this evil is
I
not
come
built
in,
into the human entity, as
she
Augustine
teaches me how
taught,
to do
but
all the
comes
money.
from without, like a disease. The
And
devil
she
and his
teaches me like
attendant
how
demons own the
to
monopoly
do
of
everything
evil,
that
and they are concerned with
open,
possessing
close,
human
and she's like,
souls
I'm
and
gonna
lighting
make
them
it
up with all the
and I was
panoply
like,
of
okay,
evil.
that's good. She's like,
From blasphemy to cannibalism, they can perhaps be exorcised. But evil does not
and
grow in
we
man
go, and
himself.
she teaches me.
The
Like, and I see how
superstitious
she
feel
does the money,
happier about their
and
own
as a
backslidings if they can
teller
attribute them to the father of
in
lies.
a financial institution, I'm
The Orwellians blame
this
it
doesn't
all
make
on
any
Big
fucking
Brother.
sense.
Orwell
it
seemed
would,
to believe that the real world,
I would
as
say, under
opposed to
some
that of
conditions.
his
If you had it on
feverish and
camera,
genuinely
in case you
diseased
made a mistake,
imagination, was moving in
and
the direction
that
of
was really
bigger
the
and
only
worse
thing. But she
cockotopias.
just did this double way of counting that was very
States
important
greater
how
and
to do
more
it, but
powerful.
it becomes like
Equipped
a
with the most
scandal.
devilish technology of oppression, they would more
She had
and
been
more
stolen
reduce
from
the
so many
individual
different
to a
ways
gibbering
that she
humanoid.
basically had,
The future presented
I don't
an
wanna say
unequal
all of
contest
the
between man and the state, and man's
equals
defeat would be humiliating in
figured
total.
out, but she had a lot of them.
We must now see
So
if
then
this
what?
prophecy is coming
She
true.
teaches me this, and I'm like, okay, well that's really tight. Then what? So then there's some other people who work there. She's like, okay, they're gonna train you. Really, yeah. And so they're like, okay, well, oh, actually, she says, but I'll teach you how to make the garnish tray. But yeah. And so what is it? It's all the things that I said: orange slice, maraschino trays, lemon slice, lemon wedges.
State
What's the
and
difference between a
superstate
slice and a wedge?
conversation. How does today's world of international politics compare with the one that Orwell
Quarter,
envisaged?
an eighth,
Very
a
different.
wedge.
There are superpowers, but they don't find it easy to
Wedge can be
exercise
different. I kind
control
of think
over
of a
the lesser
slice to be
states.
sharp on the end. A wedge
The
can
lesser
be
states have not been
bad on
absorbed
the
into the big ones.
doesn't have to.
The post-war age has been remarkable for the
It
spirit of
doesn't-
devolution,
there's,
uncountable acts of decolonization, the setting up of a host of independent tyrannies, oligarchies, and genuine
Yeah, I'm trying to
democracies.
think. Wedge shoes are a thing.
True, we talk
Not
much
that
of
they're my
spheres
thing.
of influence,
But
interlocking
in slice,
systems, and so on, but there are no great
so does
centralized blocks
right
on the Orwell model, all sharing
And
similar
yeah, cheese
ideologies.
wedges are a thing.
And where does the
Really?
power lie? The literal
Doorstop.
power that
I'm
drives
king of
machines
fucking
sleeps
wedges.
in Islamic oil.
Yeah, you're
To
not allowed to
Orwell,
use
the Middle
doorstops in a
East
lot of
was to
places
be
because it all
merely
gets
part of the
fired.
trapezial zone of cheap labor
Like,
superstates to
or-
quarrel
or-
over.
Anyway, are you done?
Islam is one of the genuine
myself
superstates
to
with a
the
powerful
next
religious
Alright,
ideology whose mail first
ever
punched
been
Christendom in the
vaccinated
Dark
yet?
Ages and may yet
we
reimpose
go.
itself on a West drained.
Hey, Rabbi.
Thanks to the Second Vatican Council for solid and belligerent belief.
Okay,
Dear, but you have to admit that the main outlines of Orwell's prophecy have come true. America, Russia, and China will deeply lead for the three great nightmare powers armed to the teeth, ready for explosion. But not exploding.
Life, animal health.
There have been no dangerous naked encounters.
Okay, are you done?
Logo machis, yes, but no nuclear attacks on New York or Moscow or Peking. No condition of perpetual warfare. 2 minor wars a year on average, true. India fights Pakistan, Israel fights Egypt, Jordan fights Syria. Shooting matches in Palestine, Cyprus, Kenya, Aden, Java, Indochina, Algeria, Angola, Mozambique, Tibet, Nigeria, Greece, Dutch New Guinea, the Congo.
Why would you want to put all the money on the camera? Because
no
you make a
engagement
mistake
of the
when you can see what you
superpowers
did
except
incorrectly.
by proxy. Korea and Vietnam. So-called Russian advisors on the Golan Heights in 1967. Both Russians and Chinese training the guerrillas of the People's Liberation Front in South Yemen. But Russian forces have only been directly and openly involved in their own sphere of action to counter the East German Rising of 1953, to put down the Hungarians in 1956, the Czechs in 1968. But there's the germ of Orwell's Eurasia Sovietized Europe. How much of Europe? Western Europe became sick of authoritarianism after not only Hitler but years of Prussianism, Habsburgism. Russia could only build Eurasia by force. And Russia's scared of using too much force. So is America. The great paradox of the period since 1945 has been the intrepidity of the little nations in the waging of little wars and the reluctance of the great powers to face each other directly. Those look to me very much like direct encounters, or very nearly so. The Korean armistice in 1953, the missile business in Cuba in 1962. But the assumption that Orwell made, and he wasn't the only one, big atomic war to be followed by a thugs agreement to keep a limited conventional warfare going, seems to belong to a very remote past. We all feared the bomb once, it was our daily nightmare. Look at literature that came out of the late 40s and the 50s. Take all this hot squeeze in essence with its picture of post-bomb Southern California converted to savagery, with mutated freaks killed at birth, seasonal sex, the Lord of the Flies bomb bringer, appeased with prayers and sacrifice. Take LP Harley's facial justice with a guilt-ridden post-atomic world in which everybody is named after a murderer and all human enterprise is blocked. Because all we do is evil. Fail-safe.
So,
Orwell failed to see that the terror would come about before a nuclear war could get started. So did everybody else.
That was a short break, damn boy.
He failed to see, also, that mere atomic bombs would be quickly followed by thermonuclear devices of far ghastlier potential. I suppose you could sum up the nuclear age like this: the big powers scared to act except vicariously, or in minor acts of punition in their own spheres of influence. The little nations warring around the immobile feet of the giants. The giants aware of the ease with which the ultimate blast could be triggered. Aware too of the consequences, not millions of dead people, but macronausea, ruined electronic equipment on both or all sides, the pygmies innocent in their belligerence. Not innocent so much as shrewdly aware of how far they can go, and how far their economies will permit them to go. It's interesting to note, by the way, that the Orwell war rationale hasn't worked in the nuclear age. I mean the using up of the products of the industrial machine in wasteful war in order to keep the standard of living low.
No.
That notion came from Nazi Germany, not butter. The American economy has been marked by colossal expenditure on armaments accompanied by an ever-growing consumption of Pacific commodities. It's as though the intercontinental missile and the color television set reside in the same area of economic expansion. In the modern age, you can't keep the two kinds of ingenuity apart, the legal and the allegedly life-enhancing. Indeed, it's possible to sum up part of the age in terms of a synthesis of the two. You know what I mean. The cozy television evening with the Vietnam War is part of the chromatic entertainment. The American war adventures have been tied up with teaching the world the merits of consumption. Nothing Orwellian there. But something more Orwellian in American imperialism, the building of a kind of Oceania with the centers of power, as with ink saw, curiously hidden, dispersed and anonymous. The CIA are kind of thought police.
Wow.
The devil think of democracy,
Really?
self-determination,
Yeah, like, I'm that
freedom of
with,
speech,
like,
action, reconciled
aluminum
with
or
bullying
whatever.
and brutality.
Aluminum. How
A
do they
free
fucking say
Franco
it
Canada.
in fucking
Unthinkable to
that
shoot the
fucking
dissidents.
shithole? England?
Too much American
Aluminium.
capital
Yeah, it should be
invested
like-
in Our Lady of the Snows, a
Look at that
communist
guy.
government in Italy, not to be thought of. I, a harmless British apolitical writer living in Rome, was well aware that the CIA was tapping my telephone. Doing their job in the name of global freedom, the traveling men of the thought police. Let's be sensible. There's nothing in the traditions of the United States which predisposes them to authoritarianism on the European model. The hysterical anti-communism of the 50s can be seen as a symptom, though an unpleasant and dangerous one, of an ingrained hatred of centralized authority.
Well, I'd be like, hey dog.
You can't deny that
What about all
America
the
did
other
a
shit?
great deal to promote democratic self-determination
Anyway, so
in
I'm
Western
working
Europe.
and she's like, okay. Yeah, maraschino
Truman
cherries. She gets the thing of maraschino
Adjacent
cherries. It
There was a
reminded me
kind
of when I was a
arrogant
kid.
assumption on America's part that she knew
This big
best,
thing of
that
maraschino
God had
cherries, and I
endowed her with a moral superiority
immediately
that
saw it,
was
and I
an
recognized
enlightened
it. Why?
democratic tradition.
When I
But
was a
that's
little
very
kid, they
different
just
from
opened up
collectivist
Sam's Town.
tyranny.
Sam's Club.
Well, one thing is true,
And we were
and
there.
this is that
And at
authoritarianism
the very
is no
top shelf
monopoly
in the
of the
very
big
corner,
powers.
they had this giant
Africa is full of nasty little
container of
tyrannies.
maraschino cherries. And
Territories that were supposed to have grown under the colonial
I
yoke
saw it,
gained
and I was like,
liberation only to
can we
set up
get that?
dictatorship.
My grandfather's
Go
like,
to Singapore,
I bet you can't
where
eat that
Mr.
whole
Lee presides over a clean and malarial heaven of free trade.
container of maraschino cherries. And my
His
dad's like,
political opponents are in jail or
all right, we'll
abroad
buy
on
it.
courses
So we
of
buy
what
it.
is called self-education.
And
The police
we
drag
get to his
long-haired
house,
youths to compulsory
and
barber
I'm just
chairs.
fucking elbow
The
deep in
media has
maraschino
that
cherries.
bland,
Eating these fucking
uncontroversial
things.
quality
I got
you
a big
associate
fucking
with
red
Franco's
fucking
Spain,
smile, like
society,
ear to ear,
weddings,
like I've
body
just been
babies,
eaten out of
mittens, and ribbons.
menstruating woman.
Cinematic
And
candor is
I mean, it
called
literally
pornography.
looks like I've just been fucking making out with the Kool-Aid man.
I lived
Really?
in Malta
Oh,
for a few
yeah.
years
Anyway,
in an atmosphere of censored
so-
books and banned films. Lingerie advertisements
all
solemnly
over.
snipped out of imported British newspapers
And I
so
got
that
so
the youth
sick
of
of
Malta might
fucking
not be
maraschino cherries.
inflamed.
I couldn't look at it
The
for a year.
Maltese government
Really?
confiscated my house
Yeah.
to still fall as
Why?
it was a
It wasn't
possibly
so much
incriminating
the
books and papers.
Cherries. I ate all the cherries and
There
that was
are a
fine.
host of
It was that
repressive
fucking
governments
juice.
everywhere, their
Why?
tyranny
I mean, it's
animated
really
by the
good,
hypocrisy of
But
doing
it's
what
like,
is
if you drink
considered
enough of it,
best
I don't
for
want
the
to say
people.
I couldn't eat it for a year.
O'Brien's candid admission
My
that
parents
Exxon
knew,
seeks
everybody
power
knows
for
I
its own
fucking
sake
love
is
maraschino
compared
cherries.
with the small tyrannical liars
Tied
positively
knots of
healthy.
maraschino cherries in my tongue.
Let's
all
think
kinds
of
of
the
things.
bigger,
Really,
older, genuine democracies for a moment.
Really? Fucking love maraschino cherries. Why?
What we ought to be
We'd always
looking
go to
for is
bars
signs of
and
inroads on personal
my
freedom.
dad would always ask for
There's no doubt
a
that technologies
bowl
of
of maraschino
oppression
cherries
exist, of a kind that makes
for
Orwell's Snoop and God police seem very primitive.
me.
Now, what
And I
worries me is the difficulty of
Yeah.
making up my
You could,
mind about these
as a-
technologies. I don't
Like,
want
if
to
you're
be
ordering
led into
drinks, you can
condemning technology
Order
in itself.
cherries, a bowl of cherries or a bowl of olives or something.
Take the computer.
Just what you normally get in a drink.
Norbert Wiener and
Yeah, is it
Warren
free?
McCulloch developed it as an
Usually,
aspect
I'm
of
sure
legitimate
probably
philosophical
would be.
investigation into the
But-
way the brain works to see how far a machine can simulate a human brain. And then what's left over is the essentially human, but it was inevitable that cybernetics
It
should
was
become a useful science.
Cybernetics, I'm a king of
And we
cybernetics.
all know how useful this tends to be interpreted in terms of control over what can be controlled, and that mostly means
So it
human
was like this
beings.
big fucking jar with a big
A
fucking lid.
computer is a
And
neutral thing.
I ate all the cherries as a little kid.
Information is a
and
neutral
My
commodity.
parents, I remember my mom was like, I'm not gonna let you. It was a
The
big
more
glass.
information
I'm
we have,
not
the
gonna
better.
let you drink all that cherry juice. And she poured it down the drain. Why? Because I was getting sick of it. And
That's
it's
the way
like,
I
I
look
was
at
like
memory banks and so
3
on.
or 4. I mean, I was not a big kid. Just eating cherries like a motherfucker. So she pours it out. Okay,
But
so
once
I
the
don't
state
get to
gets
see
hold of
cherries
computers, it's led
again.
onto the inevitable path of amassing information about its citizens.
Well, my friends got them from when I was
I don't know whether that's bad in
College,
itself, but I'm
after I
thinking
took the
of what
LSATs.
happened in
Really?
1971 in safe,
Cheers.
free,
And then what?
democratic Little England.
um
You mean the census? Look at the things the state wanted to know.
I had to.
Status of head
Had to
of
do something.
household, relationship,
What
other
did you
members of
have to do?
household, how many cars owned, did the cook have an oven, was the toilet inside the house, inside the house,
What did you have to do? I had to make this fucking.
parents or previous
Yeah,
stresses,
garnish.
education,
I don't know, what's
marital
it garnish
status,
shape?
number of children, one. Some refused to fill in the form, but the vast majority meekly complied. 800 tons of paper, 105,000 enumerators, 10 million pounds of the taxpayers' money.
Pineapples are big enough. Really? Yeah. So what's in a garnish? Wiki.
But
I
only
love Wikipedia.
500
Go
prosecutions.
to Wikipedia.
There was a maximum fine of 50 pounds for not answering questions. Alan Silito, the novelist, gave his age as 101 and was fined 25 pounds.
Garnish is big.
A man of
Yeah.
70.
It just
both
gives it
went
some
to prison.
color, and it
Then it was
makes it
revealed
dish.
by the
Really?
Department of the Registrar General that
Why?
some of this secret information
things
was
don't-
going to
things look
elite
bland without
commercial
a lot of color.
organizations.
Color is really big. So parsley is the
One
traditional
firm
one.
says by 1980. The police easily get access to this kind
Well,
of stored information.
It's to cleanse your palate afterward.
152,800 people who've been patients
think
in
it's probably
psychiatric hospitals have had the most intimate details of their lives computerized. Intelligence levels, whether or not they've ever been in prison, the degree of constraint necessary
Is
to
that
get them
really
there, a
the
full
thing?
diagnosis of the mental ailment.
I think so.
Special slots for details
Traditional
of
uses,
drug
but
addiction,
chewing on this bit of
epilepsy,
After
alcoholism.
finishing your meal, can help cleanse your palate and
But is
freshen
there
your breath.
anything really
Really?
so sinister about
So
the truth?
that your breath
And
wouldn't.
for that matter,
So like
about
people always
violation
throw that
of
shit out.
privacy?
Very
When
rarely
young
does anybody
people
eat
copulate
parsley.
openly in
but in
public
a-
places, who are we to
like, if
ask
it's
that our
properly used.
biographies go unpublished?
My mom knew
I don't
a
know,
lot
I
about
don't know.
cooking
But
and
think,
shit.
the state is only
Really?
an
She's like,
instrument.
she had signs. Her friends would give her
Everything
signs.
depends
No
on who
Martha
has
Stewart does
control
not.
of that instrument, which
Yeah.
can so easily be transformed
done?
into a weapon.
So
It is to assume, even with our heightened wariness of
There's the
tyranny,
garnishes.
a continuation of a tradition of
The
liberalism.
mandate, the culinary different-
A new Hitler could arise in Europe and be overjoyed with the information made available by a civil service thinking in the old terms of restraint and democratic rights.
celery,
Undoubtedly, the computers of the world have Jews neatly listed, as well as dangerous intellectual freethinkers. And even now, suppose a crime has been committed and a man in middle age is suspected, one suffering from epilepsy with 4 false incisors.
duck sauce.
The nation's blood groups are computerized. The state knows the addresses of all the men with red hair. You're
Jigsaw,
saying that nobody is fit to be given
egg
knowledge.
garnish,
We have to
fried
take a
onion.
chance on this sort of thing.
used on
I insist on the
egg garnish on
neutrality of
sticks
knowledge.
efforts. Granola,
Justice is always as likely to be done as injustice.
green sauce, miniature parsley,
Besides, I see signs everywhere that the state is losing power
lemon,
rather than gaining
zest, and
it.
garlic,
In Russia, in China,
lemon,
in the
basil,
bloody
radish,
little republics
manchet,
that issue no news.
microgreens,
I mean, in those
mint,
areas, the
oil,
luxury of freedom has been
ginger,
for a long
parsley,
time taken
pear
for
salad,
granted, as much
sauteed
as
mushrooms,
clean
edible
water and
seaweed,
means
sesame
electricity.
seeds, walnut. Those are
I'm not forgetting, by
caramel
the
chocolate,
way,
cocoa
that
butter,
the
flake
essential
oil,
thing in life is to
candy,
live somehow.
berries, edible flowers,
That
sliced
if the
fruit,
only way to get a daily bowl of
Sebring
rice is to
butter,
be in a
butter,
stinking
butter,
jail, well, open
caramel,
up,
honey,
let me in.
maraschino cherry,
That
preserved
in
sweetened
some
cherry,
parts of the world, the
mint,
antonym to
family
state
flour,
tyranny
plants,
is not
including
personal
sage,
liberty, but
sprinkled
impersonal
syrup,
chaos. No, I
bark,
mean the civilized
wafer,
West.
nuts, wedding cake topper, whipped cream.
America,
House wedding
Britain,
cake
Western
topper.
Europe.
Just that thing,
We've
these
seen
things.
no charismatic bull-necked leaders around
That was
for
my
a long
parents,
time.
basically. Wedding cake-
Politicians are generally
The guy's got that
despised
white
statesmen
sock.
derided.
Oh,
A
he does. He
United
looks like he has
States
sock
president
copies.
can take a deserved
Really?
whipping.
Yeah, looks great.
Orwell
Really?
believed
Yeah.
that the media,
All right.
especially the
You
new
have
ones
chicken
like
legs?
television,
All right, are you
would
done?
be in the hands of the state. That here was an apt instrument for propaganda, harangues, lordly directives.
Garnishes or beverages.
It hasn't
A
worked
general
out that way at
so
all.
twists become really big. Really,
Politics can't
Shows the
compete
Rigo-
with soap
shows the
opera
whatever
or
first
old
good.
movies.
Yeah. Shows Rigo. But yeah.
The posters
Shows
and
the whatever.
slogans we seek
Shows
are
Rigo
taste
whatever.
pleasing commodities, not
Cinnamon,
omnipotent
cocoa
Big
powder,
Brother.
carrot sticks.
We have
Jelly
a
stuff.
bearded
Shows
Southern
water
colonel
tastes
who
like-
offers us
I can say it
nothing
shows
more
water
impressive than
tastes
fried
like-
chicken. We have
shows
handsome
water.
open air smokers
Pepper,
of cool
salt,
and Kent.
of course, eggnog, may have nutmeg, cherries, lemon, lime,
The
orange
state
slice,
can't
pineapple,
gratify
strawberries,
taste or
watermelon.
censor
So what did
except
you have?
sympathetic tears are the
We
real
had
crucible.
cherries, lemon, lime, orange.
It knows it can't have our souls.
I don't think that pineapple.
That is our money. That is
Why?
true. A real oppression that
It's
didn't
true.
seem
She
to
could have. She
interest
said,
Orwell, though,
if anybody
again.
ever wants a fruit drink, there's an Asian
He
restaurant,
tried to
an
turn
Asian.
himself into a limited company to protect his
There's an
royalties
Asian
from
supermarket
1984
right
and
here. It's
Animal
owned by some
Farm.
guy who graduated from the university. But yeah, and she said,
The state
just
exerts
go
its power on us chiefly through fiscal tyranny
right there
and the insolence of
and
brutal
buy
demands,
whatever you
not
need.
graceful
Right,
requests.
watermelon cocktail, garnish, cocktail onion.
In the immorality of taking money for things not necessarily
What's a
wanted
twist?
by the pair, and all without
This is a
contract,
citrus
give us your
zest
cash or you go to jail.
added drink. But yeah. So what are the best ones? Oh man, you can do all kinds of shit. Zest is ingredients, scrape skin. But yeah. It's different than zest though, it's a twist. My father, oh my god. He'd go, shove some water with the twist. And they come back with, sometimes, very rarely, with a shove some water. And he'd say, what did I order? They said, shove some water. We're gonna go over this again. Chevis and water with a twist. Oh, sorry. Really? Yeah. Why? Because he's a dick. Really? Yeah. How would you do it? Oh, I'm so sorry. If you don't recall, I just want you to know that I had previously said it was shove some water with a twist. Could you please bring that twist? Yeah, you can just leave the glass here. It's fine. Just bring a twist. You can like throw it from the bar. Are you done? Hey, twist. You gotta sing that song. Why? I've seen this, man. Careful one. There's a bunch of them, but not that one. This song becomes big. Why? Because it was so big, it was getting side action. No, no, baby. Let's do the twist. Sidewalk. Come on, baby. Let's do the twist. Take me by my little hand and go like this. Yeah, twist. Hey, baby, yes. Yeah, yeah. Just like this. Come on, little miss. And do the twist. My daddy is sleeping. And mama ain't around. Yeah, daddy just sleeping. And mama ain't around. We gonna twist and twist and twist until a hostile. Come on, twist, twist, baby. Yeah, like this. Come on, man. Do the twist. Yeah. Yeah, you should see my little sissy. You should see my little sissy. She knows how to ride. There are three big twist songs.
Neil Samaker in for Mr. Technology tonight as we have the night off. I'm happy to be
Come on, everybody. Clap your hands. Already looking good. Now singing a song. It won't take long. You wanna do the twist and it goes like this. Come on, let's stick it like we do that. Yeah, let's twist it again like we did last year. Yeah, let's twist again. Twist again. Go round and down we go. Okay. So baby, I love you so much. Twist again. Let's twist again. Like we did last year. Is it a plan? Is it a twister? Twist again. Like we did last summer. Let's twist again. Like we did last year. Do you remember when? It's a little bit. Come on. Let's twist again. What's the time this year? Round and round and back we go. So like we did last year. Let's twist again. Twist around and see.
I'm a premise, and yeah, it's hard to have a bad day. You know, everybody has bad days. Like at the Rose Bowl or a place like that, it's hard to come home and say, hey, you know, this tough day, and you really get the Rose Bowl. But yeah, no, we're on Sunday, and it's a great place to be, and it may be my only 100th birthday of my life. So I'm celebrating with others. Wow, that's dour. I appreciate that. Start on a note of, I don't know, forward this there, but sure you will. Just like working there. I'll tell you, in the morning, to me, it's 3 years before I'm into work. But driving around the Rose Bowl in the morning and seeing everybody
That's all it is, a colored TV image of family art. When we were permitted coal fires, we saw far better pictures in them. Dullness followed by dullness. Real sleep and 2 kinds of surrogate sleep. Perhaps we'd be happier loving Big Brother. Don't for God's sake say that. Don't even think it. Because it's precisely when we admit to the inadequacy of our private lives that the state is only too happy to step in to fill the vacuum you call dullness. The night out with the boys of Fifth Squad number 7, dear. Polishing his boots. It must have been exciting to put on a swastika armband and go see Kyling at a Nazi rally. Life ought to be adequately fed and fairly dull. That's civilization. And if we don't really like the dullness, then we'd best do something about expanding our own inner vision. We can go to a George Orwell class. Armed, of course, against the more truculent of our fellow citizens. We're not being fair to the state, I suppose. When it doesn't scare us, we sneer at it. Do you believe the state can be, well, beneficent? The welfare state, which Britain has but America hasn't, though it fills the post boxes with welfare checks, all too lootable. It's good to have national insurance, but what happens to the exercise of charity? We can't be kind to the poor when the state kills the very concept of poverty. Industries nationalized, and the workers become civil servants and
Wait, that's not
fireable,
what I'm
hence
doing.
not giving a damn.
They do this thing with their fucking hands.
Without tooth and claw, no urge to work.
That.
All
I wouldn't do
nationalized
that.
industries fail.
That
Anyway,
thing.
how
That
can the
thing.
state be beneficent when it's using other people's money? Bureaucracies are self-perpetuating. Bureaucracies are haughty and inefficient. What do we need the state for? For the conduct of a foreign policy, which means having an army, and for the maintenance of civil peace, which means the police. Always done in a filing system. Let's accept, anyway, that the state in the free West is not moving in an Orwellian direction. We read what we wish, look at pornography on the streets, can buy pieces of plastic orange, make love without official hindrance.
Why? Just because it's
We
30?
howl for greater and
It
greater
reminds me
sexual
of-
liberties and usually get them. Yet the state remains an ogre,
What the fuck is that thing?
especially to the young. Ah, the young.
Italian salt shoulder. Are you Italian? We're probably king of Italy. Yeah. When my grandparents, I like on their Wikipedia, probably it's like king of Italy. When they moved over. When they were born. Really?
Bakunin's children, it is no new thing to mistrust or fear the state. The 19th century went further than our own in wishing to dismantle it as an instrument of oppression. Thinkers like John Stuart Mill saw war as a typical emanation of the state, a terrible evil impossible to individuals or free human communities, and a justification in itself for regarding the state as an unnatural monster.
Don't do that. I'll reverse it. I'm sure people
Karl
will
Marx
do that
founded
shit.
in machinery for capitalist tyranny and believed that it would rust and fall to pieces when the proletariat gained power. Michael Bakunin, Marx's contemporary, dedicated his life to the overthrow of the
What would
evil
you do
giant,
instead,
and his
birds?
spirit is still with us,
Weren't
or
two
rather
types
it
of
has
people
been
the same about
resurrected,
bad luck?
often unknowingly, among the young. Marx regarded him as a fool and a poser, if not a Zarathustra. A full century after his death calls him the father of revolutionary anarchism. Anarchism has, thanks to him, always carried overtones of violence. You can almost smell cordite in the word. But it resolves coolly and harmlessly enough into its Greek elements, and without arch